Let's go. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Planning Commission for September 12th. We'll have a roll call.
Commissioner Bessler.
Here.
Commissioner Chorin.
Here.
Commissioner Jim Schaefer.
Here.
Commissioner Mason.
Here.
Commissioner Lemke.
Here.
Commissioner Parrish.
Here.
Mayor Abendroth.
Here.
Alderman Stralcheck.
Here.
We have 8.
We have 8. We have a quorum. First item is the approval of the July 26th minutes.
I move to approve minutes as written.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the minutes. Is there any discussion?
Yes. Item H is the only item that I'm seeing on here that doesn't list the excused. Otherwise, everything looked good.
Can we add that?
As Adams and myself both voting as aye, and only one of us was present.
We actually didn't vote. Oh, which one is that? Oh,
Well, also has me as an aye, and I wasn't there.
Yeah, so I think
Yeah.
I would make an amendment to the original motion to update the ayes to include the commissioners present, move Chorin to absent, and then Strelcheck and Bessler to excused, please. I do need a second, though.
You accept that as a,
Yes, I accept it.
Yes.
Excellent.
so as amended? Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The minutes are approved. Moving on to our consent agenda, we have a public hearing. Aaron Maris for E2 Equilibrium Evolution LLC. The applicant is seeking a conditional use grant approval to operate a fitness center in the property located at 10510 North Port Washington Road. Need a motion to go into public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second to go into public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? We are now in public hearing. Is there anyone who wishes to address the council on this matter, or the commission? Seeing none.
Motion to close.
Second.
Motion second to close public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The public hearing is now closed. This is a consent item. Your pleasure. I'll move approval, subject to staff comments.
Second.
Motion and second to approve conditional use grant. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Conditional use grant is approved. Regular business, Veto Source for Select Property Group LLC. The applicant is seeking a rezoning recommendation and land use plan amendment approval to change from B1 neighborhood commercial to R4 single-family residential for the property located at 10702 West Freistadt Road.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a request to rezone the property. I have the blowing up on the screen the area of the old Freistadt Hamlet. This is the property in question here. The property is currently zoned B1. There's a single-family residence on the property that's been there since 1875. The applicant recently purchased the property and is looking to do some substantial improvements to the property. Since it's a non-conforming use, the code limits the improvements to 50% of its value. So in order to accomplish some of the goals of improving the property, the applicant is requesting to rezone that to an R4, which is our three-quarter residential zoning district. In terms of our rezoning analysis, a couple of things to hit on. I mean, since the property is not a historic landmark, but it was part of our intensive survey, and it was commented on there. That's a good example of local architecture of the late 1800s. So we're supportive of trying to maintain and preserve the old history of Mequon, and by removing the 50 percentile limit, that would allow him to do some expansions to the home and modernize it. In terms of reasonable uses, it was on the market for quite a while. It's a 0.6 acre parcel. It's not really conducive to a commercial use. Most of the interest in the property was for residential. Some were looking at maybe possibly converting it to duplexes, things like that. So it makes sense to kind of just keep with the single family use there and allow the applicant to bring it up to code and modernize as best possible. So in terms of that character, that area has always been and still is a mixture of residential and commercial uses. So we feel that this is going to actually help sustain that neighborhood in terms of its vitality. So we are supportive of the rezoning recommendation as well as the land use plan amendment. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. Go to the applicant. Do you wish to add anything?
I don't. My name is Vito Sorsi. I'm the owner of Select Property Group. This is my son, Vito.
Hi. Welcome.
And I completely concur with the staff's report.
Thank you. Commissioners?
Just wanted to commend Vito and his dad for a lot of developers, because you're really just looking to redevelop this, and you said you drove by it every day and thought you could do something to it. And so there's a lot bigger projects out there, and so kudos to you for taking this upon you, because all the people in Mequon and Thiensville can enjoy it. So,
Thank you. I live just 2 blocks down the road from there, so
yeah, it'll be neat to see.
I'd like to see it renovated.
Gonna have to reassess Freistadt.
I think it's a great idea that you're going to rehab this historic structure, although it's not exactly a landmark. It's nice to see a historic structure rebuilt and refurnished instead of torn down and replaced. So I'm definitely in favor of it.
Thank you.
Is that a motion?
Yes, that's the motion. I move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that item is approved. Good
Thank
luck
you.
to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Moving on to item number 4, Nathan Gabor, certified survey map. The applicant is seeking certified survey map approval to create 2 parcels from the property located at 6519 West Division Street. Yeah, yeah. It's father-son night.
My son, William.
Hi.
So this is a two-lot land division at 6519 Division Street. I have the CSM up on the screen. As you can see, there are 2 proposed lots, one in the front off Division and one in the rear. There's an existing single-family that you can see that is shown straddling the property line. That single-family home will be demolished prior to the recording of the CSM. In terms of our site investigation, there is wetlands on the property. As you can see through this line here, these were delineated by a sewer pack back in 2014. The only thing we're requesting there is that we add the 50-foot wetland setback shown on the CSM. We also had our city forester out there. He did determine there are 28 specimen trees on the property. So once we determined that, we went out and had, or the applicant went out and had those trees GPS so we could figure out where they were and what kind of impacts there may be to them with the building of the 2 homes. As you can see, most of the specimen trees are concentrated in the front, very few in this back area except along the property lines. After speaking with the applicant, at one point he was requesting that maybe one of these trees come down in this location to put in a driveway, but we've had conversations and he's open to either relocating the driveway maybe further back or if necessary come off Division Street with a separate driveway. As city forester, I think put in the report the trees that are considered specimen. There's some very large beech and oak trees on the property, so we'd like to make sure all those get preserved. The applicant seems willing to do so. So with that, we're supportive of the land division and recommend approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Go to Mr. Gabor and Son. Anything you wish to add?
I'm hopeful that, and maybe this is something that I need to talk to Jack later about, is I'd like to have the recording of the lot done prior to tearing the house down. And I'd like to get approval to keep the house until we're ready to move into the front, the house that we actually propose to build, but maybe that's something we talk about later.
Well, typically, we don't have an issue with keeping a house there until the new one is built, but the problem here is I don't think we can record the CSM because that house sits right across the property line. I'll confer with the city attorney to see if that's legal. If he's okay with it, then we could do it, but I think in this case, since it is over the property line, we'd have to have that demolished before we could record the CSM. The other option would be he has enough land on lot 2, he could shift that lot line back behind the house and keep the 20-foot rear setback to it. And in that case, then we could definitely record the CSM that way. But with it straddling the property line, I don't think we can do that.
Then he would have to come back.
Well, you can approve the CSM conditioned upon adjusting that lot line back, necessary to fit the existing home with the 20-foot setback, and he wouldn't have to come back for that. You can do that as a approval.
Okay.
I'm comfortable with that.
Commissioner Char?
Question, the driveway is along the east property line?
Yes,
So that would be the access point to the lot 2 then, right?
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a shared access easement proposed that's shown on the CSM, and we would, one of the conditions was to approve a shared access agreement. The only way that won't be a shared driveway, again, is if Lot 1 needs to get straight access from division to avoid any of the specimen trees.
Any further comments? Okay, so your additional requirement was that if he wants to keep the house, he needs to adjust the lot line.
Yeah, he would have to adjust that Lot 1 further to the south to incorporate the entire house plus the 20-foot setback. And then at that point, we could leave the house. And we would even allow it to be up while construction's on. We've done that in the past. We just give them like a 7 to 30-day window, depending on time of year, to get the house done once we grant occupancy on the other house.
Okay. With that, does anyone have a motion?
So move.
Second?
Motion and second to approve with staff recommendations. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item is approved. Good luck, work with Jack.
A lot of really nice trees on that lot.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time to preserve the trees.
Item number 5, Newman Companies. The applicant is seeking development agreement amendment approval for modification to the process of obtaining final plat approval for Addition 1 of Highlander Estates, which encompasses 30 lots, for a 111 single-family subdivision located immediately south of Brighton Ridge and Knightsbridge between Swan and Wauwatosa Roads.
I have the phasing map on there. It's somewhat difficult to see, but what we're talking about basically is from this line here through this line here is the second phase, and that includes 30 total lots. We did approve a development agreement and the preliminary plat back in April of 2015. The applicant is requesting that that development agreement amendment be done in order to accommodate the parade of homes. The issue is basically our current development agreement and our standard practice with most development is that all the improvements must be in prior to us recording the final plat. You also cannot transfer any lots to builders or homeowners until that final plat is recorded. This is consistent with our past policy, and the intent of it is to avoid any risk to the city. In order to participate in the parade of homes, one of the requirements is the ability to grant building permits in January of 2017. The applicant states that they'll not be able to complete all the required improvements by then, which would then prevent them from selling lots, and then builders would not be able to pull their permits. In lieu of having the improvements fully installed, the applicant is willing to put up a letter of credit in the amount of 125% of the remaining construction cost in order to receive final plat approval. Our staff is fully supportive of the parade of homes. It's a good asset to the community to have it in Mequon. We did try to offer up a number of different suggestions in order to accomplish the goal. One of them was to allow up to 10 spec homes for the parade. That ran into some issues with the builders being able to finance those homes. We did talk about potentially platting only the original 9 lots that are right at the beginning and putting the parade there, and we'd probably feel a little bit more comfortable with doing that, but based on the access to the parade, the applicant states that that'll more likely be an area for parking, and the parade would have to be located back here because the access to Swan would not be complete at that time. I think we feel that there is time left to complete all the improvements, so I think that would be our first goal, is to see if all the improvements can get in. And I know they want an answer because there are timelines that have to be met with the parade. So we do recommend denial based on the fact that we feel that we can get the improvements in. Now, if the Planning Commission is supportive of the parade, wants to provide some alternative in terms of granting approval, we'd ask that you'd bring it back at the next meeting because our current development agreement really isn't conducive for what they're asking for. We would have to basically void the current agreement out and recreate a new one. We only did this process once, and that was for Concord Creek Reserve Edition 1, I believe. We did try this on a trial run to see if we felt it was a better process. Ultimately, we felt comfortable with the way we've been doing things for years, and so that was kind of a one-time trial. But we can do something like that in this case if the Planning Commission is supportive of that. So again, we'd recommend denial, but if if we want to have this tabled, we can bring back a version similar to that at the October meeting. Thank you.
And that's an attempt to better protect the city in case something goes wrong?
Correct. I mean, more than likely things won't go wrong, but we were, in 2008, we weren't thinking things would go wrong, and we did have a lot of protections in place that other communities didn't. And, in some communities, they had to special assess people that bought lots to finish roads and things like that because the developer was no longer in business. And this basically takes all risk from the city and puts it upon the developer. So it's been a risk-averse policy for years in Mequon, and we prefer to keep it that way. I know the applicant has asked if, well, what if we'll come into agreement that we won't allow any building permits on the other 20 lots and just do the 10. The issue with that is I don't think we can prohibit them selling those other 20 lots, and if a homeowner comes in that just purchased a lot, they're going to want a permit, and we could have an issue where some of those stuff isn't completed by the time the subdivision is completed and they want occupancy, and they might not be able to get occupancy because we don't have all of the improvements in. So there's issues there that may not be a risk issue, but it also may be a political issue when you have people investing in a property and may or may not be able to get plat. Now again, these are probably very far and few between issues, but again, it's still a process we are more comfortable with taking with regard to how we plat subdivisions. So.
Okay. I'll go to the applicant.
All right. Well, thank you for your time. Kevin Anderson with Newman Companies here with Steve DeClean. Jack did present most of it. I'm sure you've read your report, so I'm not going to go through a lot of the details, but we are excited about having Highlander Estates as the parade of home sites. We were proposing to do the road that goes to the south as the parade site. Staff did offer up the 9 lots on the east side adjacent to Phase 1 as a potential parade site. The issue with that is pulling the cars through the parade as people are walking down the streets, walking in, it's protecting the visitors. So while that would be a great site for the parade, it's hard to get the 10 to 15 or 12,000 people that may visit over the 4-weekend, 3-week time period. We don't want cars driving around the people. So we did appreciate some of those options. One of the options we would still be open to is platting the subdivision and, as Jack said, withholding building permits on anything except for the, say, 11 lots on the south side. That would be an agreement between us and the city. We would agree to not sell those lots. We've talked about that internally, and we would also disclose to everybody those lots are on hold until after all the improvements are finished. So that is something we'd be open to. I think Jack said it, and I'll just repeat it, that there was some concern that then it's an agreement between two parties rather than without being platted, we can't sell the lots. So the question would be, would we just sell the lots even though we had an agreement? Of course we wouldn't, but there is some trust that would go along with that. Part of the reason that we're asking for this request is there are deadlines with the parade, and Jack did mention it is possible that we'll finish all the requirements in time to still host the parade. However, if you go through the timeline, we've already submitted the site for the parade, and just as an example, on October 18th, there's an open house where everybody that submits a parade site meets, they explain the different site characteristics. They basically sell their site starting October the 18th. On November the 1st, we have to have at least 5 written binding contracts with builders to build a house in the parade. And we think we'll get 6 to 8, maybe even 9 if we try this by November 1st. Then we have contracts with builders on November 1st, where we're still not sure if we're going to have the site platted. And so what we're trying to avoid is getting to, the day before D-Day and having 6, 8, 9, 10 builders signed up for the parade. Everybody's committed to the parade, then finding out we can't get the plat recorded by the deadline of January 2nd is the withdrawal date. So we really don't want to advertise the parade, sell the parade to the builders, go through all the efforts to find out at the last minute it can't be a host site, because by that time the MBA has made their decision on 2 parade sites or 3 parade sites, and then really we just lose a parade site. It's not, we can't switch parade sites at that late hour. So we're trying to come up with a solution where we can guarantee a parade site coming into end of September, October, have that site guaranteed, so that when all these people commit to the parade and the builders sign up, the MBA selects it, that we can come in January and there's no question on whether this will be a parade site. So,
If we write this agreement that we're talking about into a new development agreement and approve it next month, will that work for you?
I'll caveat that by saying, provided that the Plan Commission would review and approve it on October 11th, and then the Common Council would also ratify that on, the 10th, I believe is your meeting, and then the Common Council would ratify it on the 11th. That would still meet our criteria. If it got pushed into November,
We'd be out of luck.
No, I think staff would like to see an agreement between us written into the development agreement,
or a new development agreement.
a new development agreement, which we can do by October.
Yeah, we can do it. I mean, thought about putting something together, but we didn't know what direction to go in terms of, we all these different alternatives we were looking at. We could have provided you with 5 different development agreements, but we felt, okay, let's just get the feedback from the commission, see what you're comfortable with in terms of what we want to see in that agreement, and then we can create that, it'll be easily done by the October meeting.
Okay. Mr. Stelcher.
Whenever staff recommends denial based on the fact that they feel items should be able to be completed by the development agreement date, we as commissioners and council members, we struggle a little bit. The appeal of the parade of homes accomplishes the council goal of a quality development in central Mequon. So that's a very encouraging reason to entertain something different. I think what it does is builders at Parade of Homes, they always put their best foot forward. So we know we're not only going to get some quality homes, we're going to get some exceptional quality homes. That's the focus of the city. That's what we hoped for in this space. That being said, the city's not in the business of handshake trusting agreements. So as a council member, liking the idea of the Parade of Homes coming through, I wouldn't be comfortable putting the taxpayer at risk for something like that. So we definitely need some written agreement to be approved that would be legal, confirmed by legal staff, and brought back forward to Planning Commission and, and then therefore council. Other council members would struggle with the same thing. It's a benchmark for future developments coming forward. Just because you want Parade of Homes, we've had several in the community as well. Haven't made exceptions for all of them. Definitely don't want a different standard going forward that puts the city at risk. That's reasonable, to understand, but we want to support you with your efforts and bringing a quality development to the city, the interest that the traffic brings to the city on building and the quality homes that come to the city. So, Jack, can you comment on your comfort level with, really getting to a contract,
Yeah, I think a couple of the issues that I'll have to go over with the city attorney is this issue of not selling lots and not issuing permits as an agreement, and see how enforceable and binding that is. If we can do that, we also have some conditions that were done with Concord Creek Reserve that give us the ability to special assess the lots if things aren't done. So there are a number of things we can do to protect ourselves. We also have this letter of credit now, 125%. We could increase that to 150. We could require a cash escrow if we don't want to let our credit. There's other things we could do. And so I'm just looking for some feedback from the commission. I would say, number one, that if we do approve something, we would make it contingent upon them getting the parade. And if they don't get the parade, then this remains in effect. That's one of the other thing I would say is, while we can't really, I guess, know for sure, we would also prefer to see the improvements in, and if they can get them in time, we would prefer to get them in time. But there's nothing we can really do to control it. If they know they have the backup plan of not having to get them in, we can't really, know for sure if they're putting the best effort forward of getting it in, but we would at least make that a condition to do their best to get as many of those improvements in as possible.
I like two items that you recommended, contingent upon getting the parade of homes. Otherwise, the original development agreement stays in place. That's very clean living. It's a very clean agreement moving forward. I also like the cash escrow. I don't know that it needs to be into the full amount, but I'd like to see it at least 50% of the amount. With the additional being on a letter of credit, that takes some of the burden back off. I have concern about not allowing them to sell the additional home sites. If they have 3 or 4 that are going to sell, you and I know how development agreements go. That's a cash flow for the rest. That's a cash flow for phase 3. And I really don't want to stall that out by handcuffing them at this point. But I do want to protect the city. So I think, in my opinion, and the other commissioners will give their feedback as well, some level of cash escrow, whether it's 50% or the whole amount, and then the contingency upon getting the parade to make the exception would be a clean request.
If I could just make a comment. Our original discussion with staff was a written letter agreement where we would agree not to sell lots until the improvements are done. I think if we put up a cash escrow, say 50% of the total uncompleted work, and then another 125% letter of credit, we would still like the ability to sell the lots, because then we do have a financial guarantee. And the way the letter of credits are written, it is a site draft. All you have to do is show up at the bank with a request. There's no documentation besides just a letter from the city saying you're cashing in on the letter of credit, if you will. City attorney might have some requirements for you, but from the bank standpoint, you just have to show up and make a request.
Well, it's not always that easy. We've had issues in the past where we draw on letter of credits, and it's a little bit more involved than that. It's not as
Not like a bond.
difficult as a bond, but it's definitely not just showing up at the bank and saying, "Can I have my $125,000?" So there is a little bit involved in that. I guess.
I think if and when those additional sites sell, I'd like to see a multiplier going back into the cash escrow, or to pay it back, or just something. I mean, the city, once you've met the terms, I mean, they'll cut the check to reimburse you. So those funds are safe and bonded and everything else. But
My biggest, I'm sorry.
if you're selling lots, which is part of the city's, what they could hold, as a contingency. It'd be nice to see some of that income going back into an escrow. The reason I didn't request the full 125% escrow is just the cash burden up front and wanting to make sure, A, the city was covered, but B, that you had a successful opportunity to get the parade of homes.
And one of the conditions for us to sell lots is that permits are ready.
Yes.
And so, we wouldn't sell lots until that time the agreement was in full force and the building inspection department was willing to issue building permits, which, as in Concord Creek Reserve Edition number 1, that was developed by Newman Companies also. That means the binder layer of asphalt's in it at the minimum. So.
I guess our biggest concern would be the sale of lots to non-parade sites. I think we may run into an issue, and again, it more than likely won't happen, but there's a potential that when we get to the point of either granting occupancy, there are still things that may be done that we're holding up that occupancy, or we may have issues with, there's some of the requests they're asking for is sidewalk being installed and things like that. And we're dealing with potential grading issues. If someone is building a home, they don't necessarily follow the grading plan, then the sidewalks have to come in later. Then we're going to have issues maybe with retaining walls. I'd like to limit the amount of development that takes place until all those improvements are in. So I would prefer to restrict it to the 10 parade homes, because those are going to be fully done and planned in accordance with the subdivision, I assume. So I just don't want to have different builders or different lot owners that are buying houses and generally get themselves coming in and having to understand all these issues going forward.
to the developer, is a concern with the sale of the lot or the getting started on the home with the permits on those auxiliary sites that aren't part of the parade?
I think, except for, there's actually 11 lots on that road going to the south. The 2 on the corner we would not sell, and then there's 11 lots to the south. Just as a clarification, we'd be asking for up to 11 parade homes. As far as selling other lots, I think we'd be okay with holding that back until all improvements were complete.
In fact, we could file a deed restriction against all those other lots if that's what we wanted to do.
Just don't want to see the city in an awkward situation, you know, and I want to make sure that you guys have an opportunity as well. I mean, it's working together, so.
Yeah, and just from a coordination standpoint, all the lots along the north side of where the parade site would be, those would be all reserved for parking. And the 9 that are closest to the initial phase, those would be the only potential lots we could even sell until after the parade was over. Okay. So at least start home construction on. Yeah, we'd be okay with holding those, deed restriction or whatever the case may be.
You're pretty confident that you will succeed in getting the parade?
I personally am, as far as submitting a Mequon site in the MBA for a parade of homes. It's been many years since the site's been in Mequon, and I think I think we'll win. Yeah, I don't want to get too confident, but we think there's going to be 5 parade sites submitted, and they'll select at least 2, probably more 3 would be preferred. So I think we'll get it.
We have a good reputation. Any input? Mr. Mason?
Jack, you mentioned the one-time trial with the Concord Creek. Did that go okay?
Well, from my perspective, it's easy because it's all engineering related, and James wasn't here at the time, and I think most of our engineering staff that's here now wasn't here at the time. I know there was some grumblings by the staff at the time. They didn't like how some of the things went. I don't recall any major issues that came about, but again, this was coming out of the recession, so it was a lot easier and a lot more safe at that point to do it. We did have some issues with other developments that went under prior to the recession, and even with the protections in place, we did have a couple circumstances where we couldn't allow people to take out permits because the subdivision stormwater pond was done improperly and there was no one there to fix it. So again, we're always looking at the worst case doomsday scenario and try to protect the city's interests. So it did, yeah, I think there wasn't any major issues, but I think there was some uncomfortableness on how we were doing it with some of the staff. So.
Okay. So from the applicant's side, are you okay with 50% being cash that we maintain and then the rest being the letter of credit?
Yes.
Okay. So I think we're trying to go down the right path. We'd like to see you be in a parade of homes. I think that's great for the city. And then on the other side, we want to make sure that we do protect the city, and I think we're trying to come to that happy agreement. And then, Jack, are you okay with 11 homes?
Yeah, as long as they're all going to be dedicated to parade and they're all going to come off that stub, that's makes sense. So.
Okay.
And you prefer that be written into a new development agreement as opposed to a separate contract?
Well, I mean, I'll talk to the city attorney on what he thinks the best way to handle it is. I think there'll be a development agreement and then maybe a potential separate agreement, or it could all be rolled into the development agreement. I guess I'll defer to him on how we should best handle it based on what I'm hearing for you, what we're looking for control.
Okay. Further input from commissioners? You agree with the path we're going on here?
Yeah.
You have no objection to trying to score the parade of homes?
So what do you need to get the job done? Do you need a motion?
Well, you can motion a table. I think I have enough input from you guys to start working on it going forward. Well, if you want to motion a table, we'll bring it back and you'll see us again in October.
I'll move to table.
I'll second it.
Motion second to a table, and we will bring this back in October with an agreement for you.
Thank you.
Make
Thank
sure
you for
that
your time.
happens. Okay.
Thank you for working with us.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion is tabled until October. All right. Final item tonight, City of Mequon, text amendment. The City of Mequon is seeking a text amendment related to the Town Center and Arrival Corridor zoning districts, specifically sections 58-301, paren 1 and 2, window area, and 58-302, paren 1 and 2, window area. Kim.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Commissioners. We discussed this at our last month's meeting. It's basically a result of, I think, expectations from staff in terms of window coverings for town center and arrival corridor zoning districts, and some implementation by businesses, and maybe some lack of communication between the two parties. So we're back in front of the Planning Commission and ultimately the Common Council to amend the text language regarding those two zoning districts. And really the premise has been that these two zoning districts are intended to not only establish but help promote pedestrian character in this area. If commissioners who were here last month recall that I spent time not only with business owners as part of the most recent town center development, but other stakeholders, including business owners on Port Washington Road, developers, architects, and we kind of used the project over here as a case study and talked about what some of the desirable treatments or acceptable treatments are for window coverings, and those that are perhaps not acceptable or undesirable. And we talked about that last month at this meeting from a policy perspective. And so now staff has actually developed some code language related to it. In addition, to take one more step, I met last week over at the American Legion. They helped sponsor and organize the meeting. We had various business owners come to that meeting as well to look at the draft language. There are a couple tweaks to this that I'll go over as a result of that meeting. Nothing major that I don't think we can handle should the Planning Commission choose to approve this and send it forward to Common Council. So in terms of content, the text amendment basically addresses why it's important to have some transparency related to window areas on the ground floor of businesses within the town center arrival corridor district. We talk about acceptable obstructions to those window areas, everything from signage, shelving units, and then the ability to actually enclose your full window area to allow for a display window. And then we highlight prohibited window area obstructions. Those were essentially the items that both Planning Commission and Common Council thought would be undesirable, as well as our other stakeholders, I guess, undesirable images or elements to be putting in the windows. And then because we had, and we know we will continue to have probably some types of businesses that will need exceptions to these rules, and staff is trying to manage how we might be able to resolve existing conditions in the existing development, but also set the tone for treatments going forward. We basically allowed for an exception to the standards within this text amendment, and it also eliminates hopefully red tape and process by allowing that particular business to work with staff directly to come up with an agreement. Should they need something more than the 33% coverage that we're suggesting as part of the text, we can work with them and negotiate how they're going to treat their windows, the timing in which to cover those windows, and perhaps come up with some additional design measures or standards that could be provided in lieu of having greater coverage than what other business owners might be subjected to. You can see in that list we've captured some of the existing examples that we have over in this particular development. We added a category for theaters because that is a use that's allowed in both of the districts. And then we had a catch-all just in case we're forgetting something, but there could be other uses as approved by Planning Commission that would be allowed the exceptions to the rules. So I won't go over each of the technical standards for the obstructions. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at those, but certainly I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Big picture, we're trying to keep the area from 4 feet to 8 feet within the window area open because of course that's that portion that as a pedestrian you're maximizing your views into the storefront. We are allowing for some coverage within that 4 to 8 foot range, horizontal band, but we're limiting that to 30% with signage, just because we don't want to see all of the allowable maximum coverage be within that band. I will tell you that this is, at least in terms of coverage of windows for signage. It's even more flexible than what staff had discussed with some of the business owners as we walked around the site, and it is more flexible than what the current sign code allows for other businesses. Currently, for signage, you're limited to 25%. We may, at a point of modifying sign code or other sections of the zoning code, we may want to leverage some of this language for other zoning districts as well, but I think this is a good start.
Thank you, Kim. Commissioner Parrish?
Sure. I think it was a really good process where all the stakeholders were interviewed, and I know you've been working on this, and you've come a long way, and just from what it was going to be to this really detailed, concise document, I don't think there will be confusion anymore. And I wouldn't be surprised if other municipalities try to take this. It's pretty well written.
Thank you.
No further comments on it.
Thanks.
Excuse me, what's the difference between 58301 and 58302? I mean, a cursory glance,
They're the
these
same.
look duplicate.
Yeah, there is no difference in the language. 58301 is the town center zoning district, and 58302 is the arrival corridor district. So when I draft this for ordinance adoption by the council, I'll have to have both of those sections completed.
So these are for different geographic areas of the city.
Yeah, they're both town center. The town center zoning district is about from the Milwaukee River to just a little bit west of Bunch Rock. And then the arrival corridor is from Bunch Rock to Wauwatosa.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner Strelchak?
Nice job, Kim.
Thank
I know you reached out to me to try to get together, and we didn't connect this week, so.
That's all right.
You did a great job. I do see a couple things that I would have given feedback on.
Okay.
Had I personally been available to get together with you. You've got listed as a prohibited use the frosted glass. That would come under the Orange Theory Fitness, because that technically is a frosted vinyl application. I agree with where you said, so that's item one. Item
We
two.
maybe need to make a distinction between like a frosted decal that kind of serves as signage, because I was looking at that as like as their logo. So maybe I can work with you on making some
Yeah,
distinctions.
the frosted glass, I think, if it came into the third, if it came into part of the signage as counting as a square area, I think that'd be reasonable and acceptable.
Okay.
What you don't want to do is have an totally opaque frosted glass, so I think that's where your language, just that's that only variance that's kind of coming in there. In applying treatments to the interior only of facilities, and then also mentioning tinting, I think you're going to need some level of tinting as a call-out, because it's pretty standard that with the west sun, and even sometimes in the morning with the east sun, that regardless of how those windows are manufactured, there's going to be some level of tinting on that, just to avoid those places from turning into a solar oven, for lack of better words. I know when that west sun comes through, it gets really, really hot on a lot of them.
So are you saying on the prohibited section, we'd want to have a measurement related to the tint?
I'd have a measure related to the tint. I think it's going to cover your goals, but it'll allow the flexibility for the development staff to have people actually be able to operate in their facility.
We do state in the zoning district lightly tinted in a previous section of the zoning district, but I agree. We're going to get in a debate about what's light and dark.
Define.
So we'll have to come up with a measurement.
Yeah, there's opacity ratings and things for tint material that I think you can call out.
There's different colors, too.
It would just need to be a neutral color in tinting.
Okay.
That's a good call. There are different colors.
Different
You could call a bright blue or bright yellow a light window tinting and hit your percentages, but it doesn't fit what we're looking for. The only other thing is just the application of all the materials to the inside of the building. When you have tinted windows, or you have windows that are clean with a reflective nature, especially the double pane windows, if you do apply any vinyl graphics to the inside of the windows, you can't see them. So typically the applications are to the exterior of the facility, the entryways, the door logos, the things like that. If you've got heavy coverage, yes, that parameter should be on the inside. This is where it's kind of hard to write.
Okay.
But if you have like a simple logo that's of X size, determinant size on the exterior of the window, I think it'd be reasonable to put it in there, like those belly bands, like for the chocolatier listening. They do caramels, have caramel apples, they have candy, assortments and things like that. If they did a belly band with that graphic on the outside, 99% of the people walking by, unless they were looking for something to pick out, it would not be objectionable because it's well done and tasteful.
Okay.
What you want to avoid is the screening where they have like a big graphic of a runner on the outside of the window right on the corner or something like that, which is that perforated window film. I'd even consider listing perforated window film as a prohibition on the site as well, that window perf, if you do allow exterior graphics.
Okay. Yeah, that comment came up at the last week's business meeting too, that normally your decals for like business hours of operation is on the exterior. So I thought we probably needed to write in some exceptions for that.
And then institutional covers Logoman. Is that basically why institutional's in there?
Correct.
Great call. Thank you.
The other just items that came up other than the decals and lettering is that the businesses thought that for window shelving units to be set back 12 inches was a little arbitrary. We have some existing shelving units in a couple of the businesses, or even for holiday display, just specialty display during the holiday season, that 8 inches would probably be more reasonable. You're still getting, my biggest concern was just not to have everything pressed up, right up against the window. The larger that gap gets, you either then want to create a situation where somebody's able to walk between the shelving unit and the window, or you want it tight enough where, kids can't be getting in there and messing around in between. So I would be comfortable with that under the section of window shelving. I think it's the third bullet down. Instead of being set back 12 inches, we would list 8 inches. And then the other one that came up is that while we allow for lighting as part of the window displays, we don't really have any set regulations, and we'll probably end up getting into discussions about those. So Jack and I have talked about the existing lighting language, and that we can come back with some amendments for that to address this as well.
If a facility has medical use, what percentage of windows under this current listing would they be allowed to block out on the exceptions?
That's going to be up to a discussion and negotiation between those particular business owners and staff. I think one of the things I heard, whether it was the medical office or like specialty food, it kind of depends on the heat, the glare, privacy, and in the case of the American Legion, I guess, security issues. So I think we're going to be trying to manage specific conditions on various types of businesses under those exceptions. So it's a little bit hard to write something specific. And I think with blinds, whether that's the chocolatier or the dentist office, I don't even think the agreement will result in us saying, the windows can have the blinds down from, 12 to 6. I don't want to regulate it by standards on the clock. We can't, we're not going to be out there enforcing that. We don't want to be enforcing it that way. I think we're just going to be writing in acceptable times in which to use them and look for them to be responsible and respective of that.
I struggle with just leaving that open. You came before us, I think, several months back with a medical dental facility that was looking to have window shades rolled down and a percentage of windows, and that motion was denied by Planning Commission. If we don't limit or discuss, keeping it to a portion of it, we have the risk of somebody coming into town center, being medical, legitimately approved. One other place gets approved prior to them. They could take the whole bottom floor of an exterior street space and block out all the windows, calling it medical, and they'd be reasonable and justifiable in their request. I think what we're trying to create here as a city is a shopping corridor with mixed medical use in with it, but really just the general pedestrian traffic that we're trying to gain is what we're looking for is retail as well as dining. And then, medical does fit in, but.
Right, and I did not want, one of the conversations that came up as it relates to that particular case is, well, then the city should just not allow for office or medical uses on the ground floor. And I don't think we want to go in that direction either. I don't think we want to mandate that all ground floor space has to be retail. I think you're going to possibly end up with more vacancies than what you really want. I agree with your comments, Commissioner. I think that there will probably be standards and agreements such as, if you have 3 or 4 bays, along the street frontage, perhaps we have to regulate that not all 4 bays are closed all at the same time. That perhaps there's blinds or shades in which you can pull them both up and down so that you're providing a privacy band in that general area, but you're still allowing for some exposure of the window area from the top and the bottom. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, using it only when there's a privacy need by a patient. In that last section, we tried to establish some evaluation criteria in which we're going to be making determinations about approvals or denials or approvals with conditions, because I think, if we had the opportunity, for example, in this development for that south building where Ruby Tap and Forward Dental were, I think had we known we'd have a user that could potentially have blinds down for a good portion of the day, we probably would have pushed for some other building design improvements as part of that development up front, like awnings, or perhaps there's the need for some banding or graphics so that when those blinds are down, there is something else to distract your eye from just seeing 100% opaque windows.
When Blair came forward and told us about what they were putting in there in dental, and like, they're going to be dental facilities right on the street, he's like, oh yeah, they want that. They want the interaction.
Right.
And he's here selling us this, and then you've got this excellent tenant that's came and invested in the city. They're running an excellent business there. Now that's like, hey, we really need some privacy for our patients, and it's a very reasonable request. And I want to see something to allow them to operate successfully. But had that discussion been had when that building came in, and had there been a standard in place, we could have said, no, this standard's here, you need to tell your tenant that. I guarantee you the build-out would have been different. Right. They would have had several of their offices on the other side where they could go opaque. If they wanted to go opaque, maybe on one on the end and one on the end on the inside of the mall and one on the end on the outside, so that it wasn't obtrusive. They could have operated their business, hey, patient A, B, or C, you need a little privacy. Why don't you come down to this room? Here it is available. If we write it in like this, there's no holding back. You're a great development staff, but there's no holding back future development staff from letting all of the windows go opaque. And there's no holding back somebody saying that they're being discriminated against and, bringing an issue forward to the city, and really, possibly the city could be facing a legal issue that, hey, we want our windows opaque and it's a use here and it's listed and you're not allowing us, why not? They'd win that case. So we need a reasonable standard that's going to allow the business to operate, but we need a standard so that it doesn't go opaque totally street side. Well,
I'd be more concerned if there wasn't any evaluation criteria attached to how staff is going to make the decision, and the fact that we're indicating up front that there could be the need or the requirement by the city that the applicant address any adverse effects we believe there are from what they're asking by providing other amenities. And we laundry list examples of what those may be to kind of cue them in. I think the challenge to write something is that we probably can't think of every possible scenario by every various user. I mean, a theater's needs are going to be different than the chocolatiers versus, and we're talking very specific examples right now, but we're not going to be able to write standards that are going to address each one of those business operation needs. So we almost have to handle it on a case-by-case basis. And this has been the one thing that's kind of been, nagging at me ever since we started the conversation. I don't know that I can give a consistent regulation for the use of blinds without it ending up just being the precedent and having it be we end up with 100% coverage 100% of the time. I think this almost gives you more protection.
Your standard
Not
right now is they're
enough
not allowed.
coverage when they need it.
That's the standard. That's the known standard. That's the agreed-on standard moving forward. So if we're going to change it, we need to change it with parameters, period, in my opinion. If my other commissioners don't agree.
No, I think my concern there is also you're putting everything on staff and saying, go ahead and give these exceptions, and there doesn't seem to be, what happens to the guy who comes in to negotiate and says, I'm not happy with that? Does he have a recourse to come to planning commission then and say, my negotiations weren't good, I want 100%? So I'd have some concern about, or like you said, we get along with staff great, but that's not to say in 10 years it's the same way. And what if staff is doing things that the planning commission doesn't want? There doesn't seem to be checks and balances here.
Right.
Yeah, I think if I was a store owner and it says staff may approve, they don't have to, they may approve. And then the next one says they should have the right to place conditions on the design. And if staff can do that without somebody else having some authority to referee that if there's a problem, I think that puts you in a difficult situation, and hence here we are trying to accommodate some exceptions. So I think there needs to be something in there that if they disagree, they can come to the commission.
Could any exceptions?
There is that standard in the town center and arrival corridor district regulations already. There is an overall caveat in both districts that say any exceptions to the technical standards of these zoning districts can be brought forward to the planning commission.
And that would include these?
That would include these.
Okay. And I know...
I may not need that last paragraph, maybe that last paragraph, because what I'm referencing already in the code in terms of exceptions is very similar to this. It says the planning commission can grant exceptions. You all would have the right to place additional conditions on those exceptions. I could get rid of this paragraph and basically say, anyone who isn't able to be granted an exception through staff has the right to come to planning commission.
Okay.
And the same conditions would apply. Okay. So I think process-wise, we can handle that. I guess there's still the question, though, that this is still open-ended. I mean, you will all then be in the same circumstance that you're describing staff will be in.
Yeah, and I know that when the Common Council talked about this last month, one of the comments that I remember was, we want to know what's allowed and what's prohibited. But when you get to exceptions, it's a fuzzy area. So that the better we can do with this is allowed, this is not, and if there's an exception, you'll negotiate it, and if there's a problem, we'll get to referee it.
Nobody wants to be an art judge, either here or on council.
Yeah, and the stuff about building and site, changing the building and site plans, I think now we're more astute that when the projects come forward the first time, we're going to say, okay, that window faces south, could be a problem. Hopefully we'll be able to address those issues before you even get a tenant, hopefully.
Yeah, and I think with this section too, we were also at least trying to afford the opportunity to come to an agreement to any exceptions, at least at an administrative level, to help reduce some of that red tape. But should we not be able to, then bring it here.
Commissioner Mason?
First of all, great detail. I'm glad you're putting this together because we've sat here many nights till midnight on this topic, and so now at least we have some guidelines. But back on this window coverage, I know that will come before us, and then we'll be sitting here going, well, what percentage are we going to pick? Are we going to pick 20%, 30%, 40%? And we'll be sitting here until 11 o'clock at night. So why can't we just come up with what percentage to pick and put it in the document up front so we don't have to have that long drawn out discussion? Now, once we pick that percentage, say it's 30%, Now we've set precedents, and now we have to argue that number every time somebody comes before us, and I'd rather have in a document as a starting point.
Some people are going to want to block the whole window at certain times. See,
They are.
yeah.
So I don't know, if we go case by case, as Alderman Strelchuk is saying, then do we set ourselves up? Because we'll pick one guideline for one, and then we'll pick something different for the next person, and then we have variance, and somebody will say we're not consistent. I know, it's hard.
Variances are not consistent.
No.
Yeah, it's,
Yeah, and I think that's when you have to look at the specifics of perhaps the building, the business operation, the placement of the building within the overall development, how impactful is what they're asking to do? How, in this case, how impactful is it going to be on the public realm? And then also what other standards or conditions can you place on them in order to alleviate what that may be? And it may be different depending on location and business type.
Yes, that is true. What was the concern you said, American Legion security issues? What's the security issue?
Oh, yeah, they talked about that at the council meeting. They have so American Legion, of course, has an adaptive reuse of an existing building, right? It was the mobile gas station. So they certainly have some floor plan challenges that they just adopted. They have a couple locations that have, closets and or safes as part of those portions of the building that they would rather not have visibility through the window into those secured locations.
Okay.
Storage and office with computers, things like that.
Oh, okay.
Reasonable requests from the Legion. I mean,
I think if that was a new business with a new floor plan, we're hoping that those things get addressed up front through tenant build out, which we thought we had covered.
if we make a reasonable decision, we can defend it, if it goes to court.
Okay.
And the code gives us that ability. It gives us the language. We're defending ourselves based on our determination of the code. So we could lose, we could win.
Yeah.
Okay.
But at least we have something to base it on now. Right?
Yeah, and I think, I think there should be some evaluation criteria, whether it's us or you. I think that protects us so that we can justify our decisions. If we need to think a little bit more about, what the evaluation criteria is, we can talk about that.
Okay. Jack, could you scroll up to the top of this section for a second? Where it says briefing? Right there. I don't think the briefing matches this topic.
Oh, no, that looks like it was copied over.
Yeah, that's an issue with the software.
Yeah, the request
applicant?
and the briefing is actually from an agenda item. My report starts at the background.
Right. Okay.
I appreciated Alderman Strelchuk's comments. I know it's your specialty as well, so, I think it's probably about time to move this thing forward if you don't get it in October review. Obviously the holidays are coming up, and
Right.
so it will be a free-for-all over there, so I think we can keep revising this every single meeting, but I do like your comments, and I would be in favor of moving it forward to common council with some of your comments. I think it would be disappointing if we didn't move something forward, just because we've worked on it every month.
Is
month
it
after
okay
month.
to add criteria like heat, glare, sun, security? Those are some of the privacy. Those are some of the
I didn't hear
issues
the
that
first
we-
part, Mayor. I'm sorry. What was the added criteria?
Would it make sense to add those things that you mentioned, sunshine, glare, heat, security, as some of the criteria we consider?
Yep.
Yeah, just throw that in there so we have something to rely on.
if Hollander had windows on the west, they'd need to close those down, in that afternoon sun. Fortunately, they don't.
Mm-hmm.
But, they need to close something down so that people wouldn't sit in those seats.
Right.
So I do agree, we need some level of flexibility. And I would like to see the current tenant, in the medical facility have some flexibility so they can operate their business without redoing their floor plan.
Yeah, and I would look to try to achieve in those agreements that, the expectation is or the agreement is that it's not 100%, 24/7, 100% coverage of the window. We'll have to work out the details, just so that we have, if we see someone abusing the bigger picture policy here, that we've got enough teeth to go after and get it corrected.
I think the applicants here, I'd encourage them to reach out to me via email, and then I'd like to sit down and chat with them and see if we can't find something that they're looking for that I could suggest to you that might be amenable to council and the commission. Okay?
This is on tomorrow's agenda?
It is not.
It's not? Okay. So
No.
it'll be December when it comes back.
There's not a commissioner or council member that would not want to see that business succeed in Mequon, so.
Coming
Right.
back here?
Right. What's that?
It's not going to come back here. You've got,
It wouldn't come back here. It was, I was just asked to take it off the September council meeting and hold it until first reading in October.
okay. I didn't ask for that. But, okay, so you have what you need from us, correct?
I think so. I think if the commission's comfortable with a couple amendments that I suggested, then I'll work to provide some additional regulation to your suggestions going into next month's meeting.
Then let's get a date on, if you need any
Yep.
other feedback, let's get a date on the thing. And then I am going to try to sit down with that business that he did nod his head that he would reach out to me.
Okay, good. We have,
So try to sneak in with him before you and I meet and
that would be great.
come to the table with enough tools to help you.
Great. I can help facilitate that meeting.
We
That'd be
need
great.
a motion to recommend this to the common council, correct?
Yes, please.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second to recommend text amendments to those two chapters to the common council with the comments as submitted. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? That's adopted or recommended. Thank you. We're getting there. Announcements, next meeting, Monday, October 10th. Motion adjourned.
So moved.
Adjourn.
Motion and second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? We are adjourned.